Portland, Oregon. Summer of 1995. The air smelled of pine and warm asphalt, the kind of afternoon when children's laughter echoed through every cul-de-sac. 10-year-old Amanda Lee pedaled down Hawthorne Street, her pink bike flashing in the sunlight, her hair tucked beneath a helmet decorated with fading stickers. It was supposed to be a short ride to her friend's house 3 blocks away. She never made it. By evening, her mother, Evelyn Lee, stood on the porch calling her name, the tone rising from playful to panicked. Tom Lee drove through the neighborhood, headlights sweeping empty sidewalks. By nightfall, every parent in East Portland knew the name Amanda Lee. Detective Michael Donovan was new to missing persons back then, 34, ambitious, still believing every case could be solved if you just worked hard enough. When he arrived at the Lees' home, Evelyn clutched a photo of Amanda wearing her Girl Scout vest. Donovan promised her they'd find her daughter. He didn't know that promise would haunt him for the rest of his life. Within hours, volunteers filled the streets. Neighbors searched backyards and drainage ditches, shouting Amanda's name into the dark. Helicopters hovered low over Forest Park, their spotlights slicing through the trees. The local news aired her photo on repeat. 10 years old, last seen riding a pink bicycle, wearing denim shorts and a white t-shirt. Days passed, then weeks. Posters curled at the edges under the Oregon rain. People began avoiding the Lees' house, unsure what to say. Evelyn stopped answering the phone. Tom stopped going to work. The case consumed Portland. Candlelight vigils gathered hundreds, their flames trembling against the night wind. Donovan stood among them, watching Evelyn's silent tears, feeling the unbearable weight of not knowing. Each lead collapsed. A witness thought they saw her near the river. Another claimed she'd been taken by a stranger in a green truck. None of it held up. By the second week, the police set up a tip line that rang non-stop. Most calls led nowhere. Some came from cranks, others from desperate neighbors chasing shadows. The only real clue came 3 days later. Amanda's pink bike, found half submerged in mud by the banks of Johnson Creek. No fingerprints, no footprints, just silence. Donovan felt something shift inside him that day, the kind of emptiness that seeps in when the world stops making sense. He didn't know it yet, but that silence, the one that settled over Portland after Amanda vanished, would echo for decades. Stories like Amanda's remind us how fragile life can be and how quickly a community can turn from safety to fear. If you want to follow the twists of this true story, one that began in the summer of 1995 and still haunts Portland to this day, make sure to subscribe, because what came next would shake the city's faith in everything it thought it knew. Morning light bled through gray Portland clouds as the second day of the search began. Johnson Creek shimmered under a thin veil of mist, and the sound of boots crunching through wet gravel echoed everywhere. Volunteers lined the banks, parents, students, off-duty firefighters, each one hoping they'd be the one to bring Amanda home. Detective Michael Donovan stood beside the taped perimeter, coffee untouched, eyes fixed on the muddy trail where Amanda's bike had been found. He'd barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the pink handlebars glinting in the rain. Captain Morris approached him quietly. "Donovan," he said, "we're expanding the grid. I want you to coordinate with search and rescue on the north side. We'll bring in the dogs again." Donovan nodded. He tried to sound steady. "We'll find her, Captain." "We just need more time." Morris gave a tired sigh. "It's already been 48 hours. You know what that means." Donovan didn't respond. He didn't have to. They both knew the statistics. The longer a child was missing, the less likely she'd be found alive. But this wasn't just another case. This was a child who vanished on a street where everyone knew each other's names, where porch lights still burned late into the night. Evelyn Lee refused to leave the command post. Wrapped in her husband's flannel jacket, she sat in a folding chair, eyes hollow, hands trembling. She watched every uniform that passed, hoping one of them would walk toward her carrying Amanda. Tom stood beside her, pacing, jaw tight, unable to speak. The news crews arrived before noon. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions Donovan didn't want to answer. When he finally faced them, his voice was measured but strained. "We are doing everything possible. We ask the public to remain vigilant." If you saw anything at all, call our tip line. That night, the local church opened its doors for volunteers. Flyers littered the pews, each bearing Amanda's smiling face. The pastor led a prayer, his voice breaking as he said, "Lord, bring her home." In the crowd, mothers wept quietly, holding their children closer. By the third day, search teams were combing through Forest Park, the largest urban forest in America. Rain soaked through jackets, mud clung to boots, but no one stopped. Donovan followed a K-9 unit through thick ferns, whispering Amanda's name under his breath like a vow. When the sun dipped behind Mount Hood, the teams gathered back at base, empty-handed again. A heavy silence fell over them, the kind that made people look away rather than speak. Evelyn approached Donovan, her voice trembling. "Detective, you promised me." He swallowed hard. "And I meant it. We're not giving up." She stared at him, eyes red but steady. "Then don't stop looking." Her words lodged deep in his chest. As he watched her walk away, he knew something inside this town had cracked. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was the slow unraveling of hope. By the end of the first month, the search for Amanda Lee had shifted from desperate hope to uneasy suspicion. The posters were still there, stapled to power poles taped to shop windows, but they had become part of the scenery. People stopped reading them. Whispers replaced prayers. Someone in the neighborhood had to know something. Detective Michael Donovan sat in his office surrounded by stacks of reports, coffee gone cold. The phone rang every hour, tips, theories, confessions that led nowhere. He rubbed his eyes, exhaustion sinking deep. Portland's drizzle pattered against the window, soft and relentless, like a reminder that time was running out. Captain Morris entered, closing the door behind him. "We're getting pressure from the DA," he said. "They want progress. The mayor's office is calling twice a day." Donovan leaned back. "We've interviewed over 100 people. Nothing sticks. No witnesses, no physical evidence beyond the bike. It's like she vanished into thin air." Morris hesitated. "Then maybe we're not looking in the right places." That afternoon, Donovan revisited the Lees neighborhood. The once friendly block felt colder now, porch lights off, curtains drawn. He stopped at the small blue house next door to the Lees. The neighbor, Linda Carson, opened the door halfway, cigarette dangling from her fingers. "Detective," she said, "I already told the others what I saw." "Tell me again," Donovan replied gently. Linda exhaled smoke, eyes darting toward the street. "Amanda rode past here around 4:30. After that, there was that man again, the one with the green pickup, parked right over there. You got a plate number?" "No," she said, "but I remember the sound." That engine rattled like it was falling apart. Donovan jotted it down. Green truck, same lead as before. He'd heard the story from 3 different people, but the descriptions never matched. Sometimes it was a younger man, sometimes older. Sometimes alone, sometimes not. Each version chipped away at the truth until all that remained was confusion. Later at the station, the team discussed a new name, Ray Hensley, a drifter seen camping near Johnson Creek that summer. Arrest record for trespassing, nothing violent. He'd moved on weeks ago. "Find him," Donovan said. "I don't care how far he's gone." 2 days later they did. Hensley was picked up outside Eugene, disheveled, twitchy, smelling of smoke and beer. He denied everything. "I didn't touch that girl," he said. "I saw the posters. I ain't stupid. I was fishing by the bridge that day, that's all." Donovan studied him. "You were seen near her bike." "I didn't go near no bike," Hensley shouted, pounding the table. "You think I'd hurt a kid?" The room fell silent. For a moment Donovan almost believed him. Then Morris called from the hallway. Lab results came back. No match, no blood, no trace. That night, Donovan drove home under the low Portland fog, headlights cutting through the gray. The case file sat on the passenger seat, heavier than ever. For the first time, a thought crept in that he couldn't shake. What if the answer isn't out there, but closer than anyone wants to believe? Winter came early to Portland that year, and with it, the silence. The flyers were gone now, torn down or faded by rain. The Lee family house stood dark most nights, the porch light no longer burning as a beacon for a little girl who never came home. Detective Michael Donovan sat at his desk in the downtown precinct, staring at the evidence board one last time. Photographs of Amanda, the muddy bicycle, the green pickup, all pinned in neat lines that led nowhere. Each clue had been turned inside out, every lead exhausted. The case file had grown thick, but the truth remained missing. Captain Morris entered quietly. "You've done all you can, Mike. It's time to close it down." Donovan's jaw tightened. "She's still out there. Somebody knows what happened." "I know," Morris said, resting a hand on the back of his chair. "But we can't keep the task force running forever. There's no funding left." Donovan didn't look up. "So that's it? We just move on?" Morris sighed. "That's how it works sometimes. Cold cases get passed down, reopened when something new comes in. Until then, we wait." The word wait hung heavy between them. It hung. Donovan knew what it really meant. File it away, forget it. Hope time does the job he couldn't. But he couldn't let it go. Not Amanda. Over the next months, life moved on for everyone else. The city thawed. Children returned to the same streets, though parents watched from porches now. Evelyn Lee stopped attending the support groups she'd once helped organize. She withdrew into herself, her voice softening to a whisper whenever anyone mentioned Amanda's name. Tom Lee went back to the garage, his hands steady, but his eyes empty. Some nights he'd sit in the driveway long after sunset, staring at the space where Amanda's bike used to rest. The neighbors avoided him now. Grief had a way of making people uncomfortable. For Donovan, the case became a ghost that followed him everywhere. Every time a new missing child report came in, he'd think of Amanda. He began keeping her file in his car, flipping through it on quiet nights like a ritual. He'd drive past the old neighborhood sometimes, parking by the curb, engine off, just listening. The laughter of other children always hurt the most. Years passed. Donovan's hair turned grey at the temples. Promotions came and went, but the one name he could never clear from his conscience remained: Amanda Lee. He turned down retirement once, then twice, telling himself there was still work to be done. But deep down, he knew what haunted him wasn't unfinished duty. It was guilt. The city forgot. New stories replaced old ones. But in the evidence locker of the Portland Police Bureau, box number 1172 sat untouched, dust settling on its lid. Inside were all the remnants of a childhood, photos, notes, fragments of a life cut short. And yet, somewhere in that silence, the story waited. It would take 30 years for it to speak again. The rain had never really stopped in Portland. It was lighter now, a fine mist that blurred the skyline and turned the city's colors to shades of gray. 30 years had passed since Amanda Lee vanished, and most people had long stopped talking about her. But for Detective Michael Donovan, now retired, the case had never gone quiet. It still lived in the corners of his mind, as persistent as the Oregon rain. He spent his mornings at a small diner off Burnside, the kind of place that still played old country songs through a crackling speaker. He'd sit at the same booth, black coffee in hand, staring out the window at the traffic. The badge was gone, but the habit of watching people had never left him. He could still read faces, still sense when someone was hiding something. But the only person he couldn't read anymore was himself. Donovan had grown old with the case. He still kept Amanda's photo on his refrigerator, 10 years old, smiling, unaware of the darkness that would take her away. Sometimes he'd stand there late at night, looking at her face and whispering, "I'm sorry." He wasn't sure who he was apologizing to, Amanda, her mother, or the younger version of himself, who had once believed every mystery could be solved. One Tuesday morning in 2025, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, Oregon State Police, Salem. He hesitated before answering. "Mr. Donovan," the voice said, "this is forensic analyst Claire Matthews. I know you're retired, but we've reopened the Amanda Lee case. New technology, new evidence." Donovan didn't breathe for a full second. What kind of evidence? A DNA trace recovered from one of the original items, her bike chain. It wasn't testable in 1995. It is now. His hand tightened around the receiver. You're sure? We're sure, sir. It's a partial match to a living individual. We'd like your insight on the case files. For a long time, Donovan said nothing. The hum of the diner filled the silence. Then, quietly, "Send me everything you've got." After hanging up, he sat motionless, the weight of the call sinking in. The rain outside had turned heavier, tapping rhythmically against the window. He felt his heart beating faster than it had in years. There was excitement, but also fear. He'd buried this case, let it become part of his identity. To reopen it now meant reopening every wound he'd spent decades trying to close. That night, he pulled the old evidence box from his closet. Dust coated the lid. Inside lay familiar ghosts, photographs, reports, and a map dotted with red pins. He ran his fingers over Amanda's school picture, edges worn and faded. "You might finally get your answer," he whispered. But even as he said it, doubt crept in. Answers didn't always bring peace. Sometimes they only changed the shape of the pain. Still, he knew one thing. After 30 years of silence, the case was calling him back. And this time, he couldn't ignore it. The next morning, Michael Donovan sat at his kitchen table surrounded by folders and half-finished coffee. Sunlight filtered weakly through the blinds, dust motes swirling in the air like ghosts of the past. On the table lay the printed email from the Oregon State Police. He had read it 5 times already. A DNA trace after 30 years. When the doorbell rang, he hesitated before opening it. On the porch stood a young woman holding a laptop bag, her raincoat dripping. She smiled nervously. "Detective Donovan? I'm Claire Matthews. We spoke yesterday." He nodded, motioning her inside. "Just Donovan now. I retired a while ago." She glanced around his living room, noticing the evidence board leaned against the wall, photographs yellowed with time. "You kept everything," she said softly. "Some cases don't leave you," he replied. They sat at the table and Claire opened her laptop. "We ran enhanced testing on the chain from Amanda's bicycle. It was bagged with trace metal residue. Using new nano-extraction methods, we found a partial DNA profile, male local origin. The match links to a living person in the CODIS database." Donovan's pulse quickened. "Who?" She hesitated. "We're still verifying. The system flagged a partial match to a man named Richard Hayes." He frowned. "Hayes, that name rings a bell." Claire checked her notes. "He was a school counselor at Meadowbrook Elementary in the 90s, retired 15 years ago." Donovan leaned back, rubbing his temples. "He lived 2 streets over from the Lees." "Yes," Claire confirmed. "That's why we wanted your insight. You interviewed him during the initial search, but back then the technology wasn't advanced enough to find anything." He remembered it now. Hayes, polite, well-spoken, volunteering to help distribute flyers. "He was the kind of man everyone trusted," Donovan muttered. "The kind of man who blended in." Claire watched him closely. "You don't think it's a coincidence?" "I've learned not to believe in coincidences," he said quietly. For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain picked up outside, tapping rhythmically against the window. Donovan stared at the faded photo of Amanda that still hung near the counter. He could almost hear her laughter, see the pink bike glinting in the sun. The memories hit harder than he expected. Claire broke the silence. "The department's reopening the case officially, but if you're willing, they'd like you to consult. You know the people, the history." He didn't answer right away. His mind replayed the promise he'd made to Evelyn Lee decades ago. "We'll find her." Maybe this was his last chance to keep it. Finally, he said, "All right, I'll help. But I want full access to the original files." "You'll have it," Claire said, closing her laptop. "And Detective, thank you." Donovan looked out the window as thunder rumbled in the distance. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "If Hayes is involved, this won't just reopen a case. It'll reopen a wound this town never healed." By the following week, the name Richard Hayes had made its way through every corner of Donovan's mind. The more he read, the more the past began to bleed into the present. Hayes's personnel file described him as a model employee, 30 years in education, glowing recommendations, countless community awards. But to Donovan, Perfection always hid something. He sat in his car outside Hayes's quiet suburban home, a tidy single story on the east side of Portland. The lawn was trimmed, the mailbox freshly painted, the kind of place that belonged to a man who lived by routine. Claire had warned him not to make contact yet, but waiting had never been Donovan's strength. He wanted to see the man's eyes again, to know if they carried guilt or if time had washed it away. Hayes answered the door wearing a soft cardigan, grey hair neatly combed. His expression shifted from surprise to warmth. "Michael Donovan," he said with an easy smile. "It's been years. I saw your retirement announcement in the paper." Donovan forced a nod. "Didn't expect you to remember." "How could I forget?" Hayes said, stepping aside. "Come in, coffee?" Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Family photos lined the walls, students, charity events, smiling faces. There was no trace of darkness here, and that, Donovan thought, was what unsettled him most. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table. "You heard about the case being reopened," Donovan said, keeping his tone neutral. Hayes stirred his coffee slowly. "Yes, I caught something about it on the news. I can't imagine how painful that must be for the Lees after all this time." "You knew Amanda," Donovan pressed. "She attended Meadowbrook Elementary, didn't she?" Hayes hesitated. "I believe so. It's been a long time." "I knew most of the children in the neighborhood back then." Donovan studied him. Every movement was controlled, deliberate, the kind of man who had learned long ago how to hide emotion behind composure. "I remember interviewing you in '95, Donovan said. "You volunteered at the search center." "That's right," Hayes replied calmly. "I handed out flyers. We were all heartbroken." "Such a tragedy." Donovan leaned forward. "You lived 2 streets away from the Lees." Hayes's gaze flicked up just for a second. "Yes, but what are you suggesting, Detective?" Donovan didn't answer. He simply held his stare until Hayes looked away, reaching for his mug. After a moment, Hayes gave a soft laugh. "You always were thorough. Still chasing ghosts after all these years?" Donovan stood. "Sometimes ghosts don't stay buried." He left without shaking hands. As he reached his car, Claire's voice echoed in his memory. "Don't make contact yet." But now he was sure of one thing. Richard Hayes wasn't shocked by the reopening of the case. He was nervous. Beneath that calm exterior something flickered, fear, guilt, or the memory of a lie told long ago. And Donovan intended to uncover which one it was. 2 days after his visit to Hayes, Donovan met Claire at the Oregon State Police Lab in Salem. The hum of machines filled the sterile room, the scent of disinfectant hanging in the air. Claire stood over a digital display showing overlapping DNA sequences. "We've confirmed the partial match," she said. "The sample on Amanda's bike chain is consistent with Hayes's genetic profile, at least on the markers we could isolate. It's not enough for an arrest, but it's more than coincidence." Donovan crossed his arms. "So he's officially on the radar?" "Barely," Claire replied. "The department wants to proceed cautiously. Hayes has influence, retired educator, community volunteer, clean record. If we push too fast, it could backfire." Donovan gave a humorless smile. "I've seen worse men hide behind good reputations." They reviewed the old case files together. Names, dates, witness statements, each one a fragment of a larger puzzle. As Claire scrolled through archived interviews, she frowned. "These transcripts, something's off. Look at this one." A woman named Linda Carson, neighbor of the Lees. Her original statement said she saw a green pickup the day Amanda disappeared, but in the typed report, that detail's missing. Donovan leaned closer. "You're sure?" "Positive. The audio version has it, the written one doesn't." He felt the weight of old frustration pressing against his ribs. "That means someone edited it before filing." "Why would anyone do that?" Claire asked. "Because the green pickup lead was dismissed early on," he said quietly. "Too inconvenient for someone. Maybe for Hayes." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, rain streaked down the glass, distorting the view of the parking lot lights. The sound reminded Donovan of 1995. Mud, search dogs, the smell of wet pine. Claire's voice broke the stillness. "I want to re-interview Carson." If there was tampering, she might still remember. Good idea, Donovan said, but we'll handle it carefully. She's probably had 30 years of reporters knocking on her door. Before they left, Claire handed him a sealed envelope. This came through the evidence reprocessing queue, an unlogged photograph found in one of the original boxes. You should see it. Donovan opened it slowly. Inside was a faded Polaroid showing a group of volunteers during the 1995 search. He recognized himself, Captain Morris, and a dozen others. But near the back, half-shadowed, stood Richard Hayes, smiling, holding a clipboard. Funny, Donovan murmured. I don't remember him being part of that day's team. Claire studied it. If he wasn't supposed to be there, that means someone let him into a restricted area. Donovan slipped the photo back into the envelope, jaw tight. The cracks are showing, Claire. Someone wanted this case buried deep. As they left the lab, the wind had picked up, scattering leaves across the parking lot. For the first time in years, Donovan felt something stir inside him, not hope, but determination sharpened by anger. The truth hadn't vanished. It had been hidden, and he was finally ready to dig it out. The next morning, Donovan and Claire drove north to a quiet retirement complex outside Beaverton. The address belonged to Frank Dalton, a former patrol officer who'd worked the Amanda Lee case in 1995. His name had surfaced in multiple reports, but what caught Claire's attention was that Dalton had signed off on the evidence log the day the green pickup lead vanished. Dalton's apartment smelled faintly of cigarettes and stale coffee. The old man sat in a recliner near the window, oxygen tube hooked behind his ears. When he saw Donovan, his expression flickered between recognition and regret. "Michael Donovan," he rasped. "Didn't think I'd ever see you again." Donovan gave a polite nod. "We're revisiting the Lee case, Frank. There are inconsistencies in the records." Dalton's hand trembled as he lifted a glass of water. "You mean the truck," he said quietly. Claire leaned forward. "You remember it?" "I never forgot it," he murmured. "But I was told to." Donovan's voice hardened. "By who?" Dalton stared at the floor. "Captain Morris. Said the witness was unreliable. Told me to strike the mention from the official transcript before it went to the district attorney." Claire exchanged a quick look with Donovan. "Why would he do that?" she asked. Dalton shook his head. "He said we were chasing the wrong angle, that we'd ruin an innocent man's life if we kept digging." "Hayes," Donovan said. Dalton didn't answer, but his silence was confirmation enough. The sound of rain tapped against the window, steady and cold. "I wanted to come forward years ago," Dalton said, voice cracking. "But after what happened to my wife, I couldn't handle another fight. I burned the memo. Thought if I forgot, maybe it'd all stay buried." Donovan clenched his jaw. "You let a child's case rot because you were afraid." Dalton's eyes filled with tears. "I was wrong. I know it now. But you weren't meant to find that trail again. Some people in this department back then, they had more to lose than you realize." Donovan stood, anger building in his chest. "Then help me fix it. Tell me everything you remember about Hayes and the cover-up." Dalton's breathing grew shallow. There was talk that Morris owed Hayes a favor. Something to do with a donation to the precinct fund. Hayes had connections, money, influence. I don't know the details. But he wasn't just some teacher. Claire's voice softened. "Frank, would you be willing to give a statement? We can record it now." He shook his head slowly. "I don't have much time left, sweetheart. But if you're reopening the case, look in the old property room, box 1172. You'll find what he didn't want you to see." Donovan froze. He knew that number. The box had sat untouched for decades in the evidence locker, the same one that held Amanda's belongings. As they left the apartment, Claire whispered, "You think he's telling the truth?" Donovan's eyes darkened. After 30 years, the truth finally started talking. Now we have to decide how far we're willing to follow it. By dawn, the rain had turned into a steady drizzle that softened the edges of Portland's skyline. Donovan drove toward Forest Park, the place where Amanda's trail had last gone cold. Claire sat beside him, reviewing Dalton's words over and over. Box 1172. The thought gnawed at both of them, but Donovan insisted on coming here first. Something told him the answer wasn't buried in paperwork. It was still hiding where it all began. The forest was quiet, heavy with moisture. Fog curled between the fir trees, swallowing the world in grey. Claire pulled her hood tighter. "You really think there's something left to find after 30 years? "Not something," Donovan said. "Someone." They followed the narrow path that led down toward Johnson Creek, the same area where Amanda's bike had been found. Every step brought back memories, the search dogs barking, radios crackling, the sickening silence that followed. He'd walked this same ground so many times that summer, he could still feel the mud beneath his boots. Claire stopped near a fallen log. "What are we looking for exactly?" "Patterns," Donovan said, scanning the tree line. "Back then we only saw what we wanted to see. But nature doesn't forget. It keeps its secrets where humans don't look." For an hour they searched. Nothing but moss, wet leaves, and the hum of distant traffic. Claire crouched near the creek bed, tracing the soil with her gloves. "If Dalton's right about that box, it could change everything," she said. Donovan nodded absently, lost in thought. Morris signed off on every failed lead. Hayes was in his circle. If he buried evidence, the question is why. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of decay. Claire turned, frowning. "Do you smell that?" Donovan followed her gaze to a cluster of roots at the edge of the creek. Something metallic glinted beneath them. He knelt down, brushing away damp earth until a fragment of metal emerged. A small locket, tarnished but intact. Inside was a faded photograph of a child. Claire whispered, "That's Amanda." Donovan stared at it, a chill cutting through him. "This wasn't in the original evidence log," he said. "Someone came back here after the case went cold." "But why leave this?" Claire asked. "Maybe they couldn't keep it," he murmured. "Maybe guilt brought them back." They placed the locket carefully in a bag. As they stood, the forest seemed to press closer around them, the wind rustling like a whisper. Donovan looked up through the trees, his voice barely above a breath. 30 years and she's still here, the woods remember." Claire met his eyes. "So does the truth." As they walked back toward the car, Donovan felt the weight of the years closing in. Every discovery seemed to lead not to closure, but to deeper uncertainty. Yet somewhere inside that uncertainty, he felt something awaken, a sense that they were finally pulling at the right thread. And whatever waited at the end of it, he knew, would change everything. The discovery of the locket changed everything. It was proof someone had returned to the scene, and Donovan knew exactly who he needed to face next. Evelyn Lee had spent 3 decades living in the shadow of unanswered questions, and though time had softened her voice, it hadn't dulled her grief. He found her at a modest crafts shop on the outskirts of Portland, where she spent her days teaching art classes to children. When she saw him, her expression didn't register surprise, only the weary acceptance of someone who'd learned that pain always finds its way back. "Michael," she said quietly, "I wondered when you'd show up again." He nodded, removing his hat. "We've reopened Amanda's case." "I thought you should hear that from me." She gestured toward an empty stool. "Then sit. It's been a long time since anyone wanted to talk about her." Donovan sat, taking a moment before speaking. "We found something new in the woods near Johnson Creek. A locket. It belonged to Amanda." Evelyn's hand froze mid-air, the faint tremor of memory rippling through her. "The silver one with the photo inside?" "Yes." She closed her eyes. "Tom bought it for her 10th birthday. She never took it off." When she opened her eyes again, they glistened with restrained emotion. "So someone brought it back there. What does that mean?" Donovan hesitated. "We don't know yet, but there's more." DNA from the original evidence matched a name. Richard Hayes. Evelyn's expression didn't change at first. Then her lips pressed into a thin line. "I knew it," she whispered. Donovan leaned forward. "You suspected him?" "For years," she said. "But no one listened. He was everyone's favorite teacher. Helped with the search, spoke at the vigil, even brought casseroles to our house. People called him generous. I called him observant." Her voice broke slightly. "He used to watch Amanda at the playground. Not in a way anyone would notice, but I did. I told Tom once. He said I was imagining things. After she disappeared, I told the police too. I never heard back. Donovan's chest tightened. Your statement was probably buried. We found evidence that some reports were altered. Evelyn looked at him with quiet fury. 30 years, Michael, 30 years of being the mother who lost her child and never got answers. Do you know what that does to a person? He nodded slowly. I do. I carry it too. She studied him for a long moment. Then don't make me another promise. Just finish it. I intend to, he said. As he stood to leave, Evelyn reached into a small box behind the counter and handed him a worn Polaroid, Amanda, Hayes, and other children at a school picnic. He came by the house the week before she disappeared, Evelyn said. Said he was dropping off art supplies. I never saw those supplies. Donovan stared at the photo. You just gave me what we were missing. Her voice softened. No, Detective. I just reminded you who you're fighting for. The morning Richard Hayes was arrested, Portland awoke to grey skies and a low mist rolling off the river. It was the kind of day that carried weight in the air, as if the city itself knew something monumental was about to happen. Donovan watched from his car across the street from Hayes's home, the same neat house he'd visited weeks earlier. Police cruisers lined the block now, their lights flashing silently. Claire sat in the passenger seat, clutching the warrant in her hand. We've got confirmation, she said quietly. The lab retested the DNA from Amanda's locket. It's a full match to Hayes. This is it. Donovan nodded but said nothing. His eyes stayed fixed on the front door, his mind replaying Evelyn's words. Don't make me another promise, just finish it. At 8:03 a.m., Hayes stepped outside, dressed in a sweater and pressed slacks, as if heading to church. He looked calm, almost expectant. The officers approached, reading his rights as they placed the cuffs around his wrists. Neighbors gathered on porches, murmuring disbelief. One woman whispered, "That can't be Richard. He's helped my son with homework for years." As Hayes was led toward the patrol car, his gaze met Donovan's through the drizzle. There was no defiance in his eyes, just a faint, unsettling smile. Donovan opened his door and walked toward him. 30 years, Donovan said quietly. That's how long she's waited. Hayes tilted his head. And what if you've spent 30 years chasing the wrong man? Claire stepped forward. The DNA doesn't lie. Maybe not, Hayes replied, his voice smooth. But people do. Especially those who need to believe they've finally found peace. Donovan's jaw tightened. You can save the riddles for the courtroom, Hayes smirked. I'll do that, Detective. But when you look back on this, ask yourself who really wanted Amanda Lee's story buried and why. The words hung in the air as the car door closed behind him. The sound of the latch echoed like the final note of a long-forgotten song. Within hours, the news exploded across Oregon. Former school counselor arrested in 1995, cold case, flashed on every television. Reporters swarmed the precinct. Old neighbors cried on camera, insisting Hayes was a kind man, incapable of harm. Others admitted they'd always felt something off about him. The city that had once mourned Amanda Lee now pulsed with confusion and disbelief. In the observation room, Donovan watched Hayes through the glass as he sat at the interrogation table, hands folded neatly, face expressionless. Claire joined him, her voice low. You did it, after all these years. He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on Hayes, that same unnerving calm radiating from him. We found him, Donovan said finally, but I'm not sure we've found the truth. Outside, thunder rumbled over the city, faint but steady. Donovan turned away from the glass, the sound of rain returning to its familiar rhythm. For 30 years, silence had defined this case. Now, for the first time, the storm had begun. The interrogation room was small and cold, the hum of the overhead light steady and low. Richard Hayes sat at the metal table, hands folded, wrists still marked from the cuffs. Across from him, Detective Claire Matthews clicked on the recorder. Donovan stood in the corner, silent, his presence heavy but controlled. Claire's tone was calm. Mr. Hayes, you've been advised of your rights. We'd like to give you a chance to explain. The DNA evidence places you at the scene where Amanda Lee's bike was found. Hayes smiled faintly. I never denied being near that creek. I helped search there, remember? Donovan stepped forward. Your DNA wasn't found because you volunteered. It was on the locket that disappeared from evidence 30 years ago, the same locket we found buried by the creek last week. For the first time, Hayes looked away. That locket. She must have dropped it. She didn't, Donovan said sharply. Someone took it off her. You. The room went still. Claire leaned forward. Why don't you tell us what happened that day, Mr. Hayes? Hayes's expression shifted, a mix of fatigue and resignation. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Try us, Claire said. He exhaled slowly. Amanda came by my house that afternoon. She said she'd found a kitten near the school and didn't know where to take it. I told her to bring it in, that I'd help her find its owner. His voice grew quieter. She dropped the cat, it scratched her, and she ran off toward the woods. I followed to make sure she was okay. Donovan's eyes narrowed. And then? Hayes looked down at his hands. We argued. I told her to go home. She called me a liar, said she'd tell her parents I'd grabbed her arm. I panicked. I didn't mean to hurt her. She fell, hit her head on a rock. There was blood. I froze. Claire's voice softened, though her hands trembled slightly. You didn't call for help? He shook his head. I was terrified. A grown man alone with a child. No one would believe it was an accident, so I hid her as by the creek. His voice cracked. Then I came back later to bury her things. I couldn't stand to see them. Donovan felt his stomach tighten. 30 years, Hayes. You watched her mother break. You watched the city mourn, and you said nothing. Hayes's eyes glistened. Do you think I didn't suffer too? I lost everything that made me human that day. Donovan's voice was low, steady, but filled with restrained anger. You didn't lose it. You buried it with her. For a moment no one spoke. The sound of rain against the window filled the silence, slow and deliberate. Claire stopped the recorder. This statement will be submitted to the district attorney. Hayes looked at Donovan. You got what you wanted. Now maybe you can finally rest. Donovan stared back. Rest doesn't come from truth. It comes from justice. The trial of Richard Hayes began 6 months later in the Multnomah County Courthouse, under the same gray skies that had watched over Amanda Lee's disappearance. The courtroom filled each morning with a quiet tension, a city holding its breath as decades of grief resurfaced. Reporters crowded the hallway. Former students, neighbors, and old colleagues of Hayes lined the benches, each one struggling to reconcile the man they knew with the story being told. Donovan sat near the back, no longer part of the investigation, but unable to stay away. He watched as Hayes entered, dressed neatly, calm as ever, escorted by 2 officers. The years had carved deep lines into his face, yet his composure remained unnerving. When he took the stand, his voice was steady, his confession unchanged. I never intended harm, Hayes said. It was an accident. I panicked. I lived with that guilt every day. The prosecutor paced slowly in front of him. You call it guilt, Mr. Hayes, but guilt doesn't bury a child. It doesn't stay silent for 30 years. Hayes looked down, saying nothing. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of rain against the windows. Evelyn Lee sat in the front row, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her hair had grayed, but her eyes remained sharp, unwavering. When the defense spoke of Hayes's service to the community, she didn't flinch. When they mentioned his remorse, she didn't blink. She had come for one reason only, to hear the truth spoken aloud where it could no longer hide. Claire Matthews testified next, her professionalism intact, but her voice trembling when she described finding the locket near the creek. It wasn't just evidence, she said quietly. It was a reminder of what time tried to erase, and what it couldn't. When the verdict came, the room held its breath. Guilty of manslaughter in the 1st degree. The words rang out with the weight of 30 years. Evelyn closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. Donovan felt the tension in his chest finally ease, though the relief came with no triumph. Justice, he realized, was rarely clean. After the hearing, Evelyn approached Donovan in the hallway. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she said softly, You kept your promise. I told you I would finish it, he replied. But I wish I could have finished it sooner. She nodded, her voice steady. You can't rewrite time, you can only stop it from repeating. Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped, leaving the air cold and still. Reporters shouted questions, flashes went off, but Donovan didn't stay to watch. He walked to the edge of the courthouse steps, staring out over the city. For 30 years, silence had been his enemy, silence in the files, silence in the hearts of those who'd given up. Now it was something else entirely. It was peace, fragile, imperfect, but real. He knew the world would move on again, as it always did. But for the first time, Amanda Lee's name would not fade into dust. It would live in truth, spoken clearly, after all the years of quiet. Months passed before the world stopped talking about the trial. Headlines faded, the cameras left, and the story that had once consumed Portland returned to whispers. But for those who had lived it, Donovan, Evelyn, and the quiet memory of Amanda Lee, it would never truly end. On an early spring morning, Donovan drove north toward the Willamette River. Mist hung low over the water, curling like breath against the cold. He parked by the trail that led down to a small clearing, the same spot where the city had built a memorial for missing children. Names carved into stone, candles, flowers, hope and heartbreak intertwined. He stood there for a long time, hands in his coat pockets, the soft hum of the river filling the silence. A few feet away, Evelyn Lee placed fresh lilies beside Amanda's name. When she turned and saw him, she offered a faint smile, tired but genuine. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "I couldn't stay away," he replied. "This is where it all started for me." She looked toward the water. "And where it ended." He nodded slowly. "In a way, but I don't think things like this ever really end. They just change shape." For a moment, they stood in silence, listening to the river's steady rhythm. Then Evelyn said, "You know, when Amanda was little, she used to say the river could talk. She said if you listened long enough, it would tell you secrets." Donovan smiled faintly. Maybe she was right. Maybe that's why the truth finally surfaced. Evelyn turned to him, her expression softer now. "You did what no one else could. You gave her a voice again." "I gave her justice," he said quietly. "You gave her love." "That's what she'll be remembered for." She reached into her bag and handed him a folded photograph. It was the same one she'd shown him before, Amanda laughing at the school picnic. "Keep it," she said. "You carried her story longer than anyone. You deserve to keep a piece of it." Donovan hesitated, then accepted it. "Thank you." When Evelyn walked back toward the parking lot, he stayed behind, watching the water move, slow, deliberate, endless. The surface shimmered with light, and he thought of how time, like the river, carried everything away eventually. But it also revealed what refused to stay buried. He spoke softly, not to anyone living, but to the current itself. "We found you, kid." Took a while, but we did. A gust of wind swept across the clearing, rustling the trees. For a moment he imagined hearing laughter, a child's laughter, faint but real. It lingered just long enough to make him believe it wasn't imagination at all. As he turned to leave, the morning sun broke through the clouds, scattering gold across the river. Donovan paused, letting the warmth reach his face. He felt lighter than he had in years. The case was over, but its echoes would live on. In memory, in truth, and in the quiet voice of a river that never forgot.